Hello and welcome to today's episode of Great Quarter Guys. I am your host, Andrew Cox, here with my man, Kevin Hill. Today's a bit of a celebratory episode. This is our episode number 25, the first of hopefully many mile markers.
Exactly right, 25. I guess 26 would be an even 6 months, right?
Yeah, that would be. That's right. I guess that makes sense if we do one once a week. I think we may have had a break in there for holiday or something. But
we might have, but it's been about 6 months.
Yeah, it's been going strong.
Time really flies, doesn't it?
It did. Every month except for March seemingly flied. You know, March has seemingly was the longest month of my life. April has gone by much quicker for me, at least. I looked down and I was like, dang, half the month is gone.
You're right. I guess I did realize we were in April, but it still feels like March. It feels like a crazy March time still dragging into April, and we are halfway done with April. Tomorrow's the 15th. The stimulus checks, there's supposed to be a whole batch of them, go out by the 15th. Taxes aren't the 15th this year. They're July 15th. They have an extension, and it's a whole new world right now.
It is. It's moving by quicker than it did before. We're seemingly adjusting. Let's go ahead and jump into a little bit of what we're going to be doing for you today, what we're talking about last week. We'll cover our long shorts that we did last week. We'll give a little update to those. So we had 2 long shorts last week. They were, the first was weekly jobless claims. So we asked when the data came out last Thursday, were they going to be higher or lower than the previous week? They came in just below, but still with a really scary number. So 6.6 million last week. Kevin, what do you think about this week?
That's a really good question, what I think about this week. It's weird because they adjusted oppositely, right?
Yeah, they adjusted
so basically
2 weeks ago, down last week.
Yeah, so we were having that conversation earlier because the initial numbers were 6.6 and then 6.8, but I guess they flip-flopped, so I lost both my long shorts because of the adjusted numbers, but not really a laughing matter.
Not at all.
16 million job losses over the last 3 weeks. Is serious. I think it's going to be down a little bit. I think it's still going to be in any other case, a year ago, it'd still be a shocking number. But I think around 4 million-ish.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be lower than 6 million. I think we've almost found our natural kind of ceiling there. That we've heard a lot of stories from different states, whether it's Florida or California, even where they've had difficulty. They've had some lag in time where people haven't been able to get the benefits that they've applied for. So I think we may have met kind of our infrastructure ceiling there with about 6 million.
Yeah, I think so too. So basically, 1099s aren't normally eligible for unemployment benefits, but it looks like. Now they are. And if you were a 1099 or independent contractor, you had to actually call. In most states, you had to call and physically talk to somebody. And that's taken 2 or 3 weeks for that infrastructure to catch up. So I think it'd be more normal going forward. And hopefully some restrictions will be lifted in some states in the next, few weeks, that we'll all start returning to some semblance of normalcy sometime soon.
Right. So another point that we're not really used to seeing, no normalcy right now in the outbound tender volume index. We asked last week if we believed that by today, that outbound tender volume index, which is a measure of the volumes that move in the U.S., we asked would it be below 9,000? That would be drastically below the starting point in March 2018 of 10,000. We both went long, and we were right there. So today, as of today, April 14th, the outbound tender volume index is a little bit over 8,800. So this is a holiday type level. We've never seen normal non-holiday levels with outbound tender volumes at quite this low.
You're right. I mean, it's right 9.5%, 9.25% below 2019 for this week. So basically, it's kind of plateaued a little bit. We have the holiday to move through for really clean year-over-year numbers. Hopefully, it doesn't fall too much further from here. There are some encouraging signs, though.
Yeah, we'll save a little bit of that discussion for our talk on the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index towards the end of the show. And here we go. Our next segment is a continuation of the new segment that I did 2 weeks ago. It's called One Good Piece, where I try to find one good piece of data in this time of just horrible and scary economic data. This week it's a little bit of a discussion because this data point, it has some pros and cons to it. Last week, the one good piece of data was regional differences in foot traffic in retail foot traffic data. As I noted, places that hadn't been hit as hard by the coronavirus, their foot traffic data didn't worsen as bad as the other areas, which gave me a little bit of encouragement that we could have a snappy, speedy retail recovery. This week, another point that could point towards a speedy retail recovery. So this is auto sales out of the Wuhan area, which of course was the epicenter, the original epicenter of COVID-19. We've heard reports from multiple dealerships in Wuhan that new vehicle demand, the demand for new cars at these dealerships, has quickly returned to pre-crisis levels. So I see a bunch of read-throughs here. One, I believed that durable goods would have a much slower recovery than non-durable goods when this whole thing is over. But this is signs that if the U.S. has any semblance to a Chinese recovery, then we could see durable goods snap back pretty quickly. What do you think, Kevin?
I think you're right on the read-throughs. The assumptions that the U.S. economy will mirror the Chinese economy or Wuhan, I don't really know. I mean, it's a tough comparison to make. I know a friend of mine who's in the used car business, kind of one of those buy here, pay here places. A lot of people are using stimulus checks or basically the promise of stimulus checks to promise down payments, right? So they'll put up $500 and basically promise their stimulus checks to the car. So it's been pretty healthy for him. So people are still buying cars. I guess if you need a car, you're going to buy a car. But I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be as sharp as it probably be still V-shaped, but not quite as sharp as what we're seeing in the Chinese data.
Yeah, that was one point that I wanted to make was this if people want a car, if they need a car, they'll go get a car. That may be one of the reasons that people in China are buying the cars now is because they think it's safer to drive a personal car than to get on public transport. This is they still having, although don't have any new cases in Wuhan for the last couple of days, people are still afraid. This is definitely weighing on the psyche of travelers and workers and everything else. And this also could just be a difference between the Chinese and the U.S. recovery. China did more to help the businesses to allow them to keep their workers rather than the U.S. did kind of direct disbursements. So it's just a difference in the way that we approach this. But I think that the U.S. consumer, the reason I don't believe durable goods will snap back as quick is because a lot of people have lost their jobs. We've had, like we just said, with the weekly jobless claims, will likely push over 20 million in the last month. That weighs on the American psyche, on the consumer sentiment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be a month or two behind on the bills, right? Whether it's mortgage, rent, utilities, whatever it may be. So there's going to be some time of catching up, getting back to work, getting your bills paid before you go out and buy really durable items or long-lasting, but there's some demand out there. I think everyone has already went out and bought all the remodeling and redesigning at Home Depot and Lowe's. I think that will probably drop off a little bit because that's what everyone has been doing. That I've talked to. I think everyone's painted their house.
Right.
If you own a home, you probably painted it over the last 4 or 5 weeks. So that'll be something to watch. I can start seeing a little bit of a brightening. Or a light at the end of the tunnel is still, far away. But
we're looking
I'm more
for
optimistic now than I have been throughout March, over the last 6 weeks, probably 7 weeks.
I think we've had so much bad news. We're just looking for any good news. That's why we started this one good piece. But let's bring in one good guy. Is Ryan Schrieber about ready to bring in?
He is. I just saw a message while you were talking that he had dropped off, but it looks like he is ready to get back in. And for a little bit of a promo as we get him up on screen, it goes back to a TQL story that we published last week about non-competes and non-solicitation agreements and kind of how those are worked, especially in the transportation industry. And Ryan's going to come on and talk more about the differences between the two, because there's often some confusion between those two contracts and kind of how you can protect your business, but also encourage a great corporate culture. And I see Ryan Schrieber right there. And you are back. Before we begin, legal disclaimer, Ryan's a lawyer, but we are not giving out any legal advice whatsoever. And, he's not a practicing lawyer.
I'm retired.
He's a retired lawyer. But we're going to talk about
Abraham Lincoln.
we're going to talk about non-competes, non-solicitations, but we are not giving out any legal advice. Whether or not what you've signed is enforceable, nothing like that. Just the overall philosophy about the two, the differences between the two, and how they're kind of used in the industry. Ryan is a consultant at Carrier Direct, and this will be more consultative than legal, because it won't be legal whatsoever. Is that a good enough disclaimer?
Yeah, that's pretty thorough. Absolutely. Like nothing. I am no one's attorney, so don't take anything that I say as legal advice. And yeah, I mean that's a good way to put it. So I'm happy to be here, and certainly this is very topical because of TQL getting negative press. I mean, Arrive has gotten some pretty positive press for letting their employees out of non-compete, non-solicit that they had to lay off. But definitely want to have a broader conversation around where non-competes and non-solicits fit. And since it's top of mind for everybody, this is great timing.
All right. Well, let's start off with the most simplest, basic thing that we can and differentiate non-compete with non-solicitation.
Yeah,
because
so that's a great place to start. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's do non-compete first. What is a non-compete, Ryan Schrieber?
So I'll talk about what they both have in common and how they're different. They both have a defined scope, which is time, geography, and activity. So both restrict certain activities. A non-compete defines the ways in which you can compete with the business that you are leaving. And so they may restrict you from being in the industry entirely on the more aggressive end to just not competing in certain roles on a less aggressive end. So as an example, they may say you can't take a job where you have the same job you had in the last 12 months, like example sales. A non-solicit says you cannot go after a certain segmentation of relationship, which may be customers, vendors, employees, etc. So those are the kind of the key differences.
So Ryan, how often is this used? Let's use brokerage for the first example. In a normal brokerage, we were talking about TQL and Arrive before this. What is how often are these used? Is it pretty much every time a new broker comes on, they sign either a non-compete or a non-solicitation?
Yeah, anecdotally, most businesses use them, and usually they will use them role independent. And non-compete is still the most common form of restriction.
So non-compete is the most common. Did you? Is that what? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. And so, and there's a way in which, if you think about these things, like a non-compete is a higher order thing than a non-solicit. So if I can't compete with you as a business, I also cannot go after your customers. But definitely non-competes are still used very commonly.
Yeah, I don't think I've working for a logistics company. I don't think I've ever done a non-compete. I have done a non-solicit. I think that's universal almost, right? Non-solicit to where I can't go solicit. If I leave and go to another brokerage within 12 months, I can't contact their customers, right? Whether they're my customers or theirs.
How aggressive the non-compete is really does vary. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen, again, anecdotally, very many non-competes which say, you can't go be an account manager for 12 months, but you can go be like a billing clerk if you wanted to. So the full power of a non-compete can't work in the industry is less common than the smaller one if you can't do this certain thing. But that it definitely depends. And one of the biggest inputs is how sophisticated the business is.
Ryan, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. We have some static. Let's flip you back to the studio or back to the control room to work that out. but you're a lot of static.
Yeah, so we'll bring Ryan back just here in a moment, and we'll get his topic or his discussion on the DHL supply chain pricing power index. We'll go ahead and do that update now, and maybe Ryan will have some points to talk about the market environment right now anyway. But while we wait on him, so again, the DHL supply chain pricing power index, it fell 15 points this week. We were at 60 last week, which would have been slightly some power to the carriers. We felt that the carriers were still in a pricing power position at that point, but that position is just melting away every day that goes by, isn't it, Kevin?
It is. So we talked about it a little bit on our long short from last week, is that we're about 10% below levels in 2019. We had a huge run up, had a really great peak where we're 30% up year over year, and that's been falling. If you watch FreightWaves at all, you've heard this before, because this is what we talked about quite a bit on the tender volume index. Flying down. Rejections, I looked this morning, and that's worrisome as well. They're down to 5.11%. And that was from a high, and that's basically out of every 100 loads tendered, roughly 5 are getting rejected. A week, maybe 2 weeks ago, that was about 20 were getting rejected, or close to 20 were getting rejected for every 100, which shows very tight capacity, run up in freight. Now it's back down to 2019 levels, and 2019 levels, especially for rejection and capacity, were not good.
Right. I mean, it was an overcapacity environment that we experienced for all of 2019. Our outbound tender rejection index is now below the 2019 average. Volumes and rejections seem to be falling without a floor, even though for the last 2 days we have seen a little bit of a slowing, a deceleration in the decline on the volume side, at least. So that's a slightly encouraging, but I really don't think this is. I think 8,800 is not the floor. I think we keep falling a little bit. You got to think about it this way: the businesses are not open, the consumers are still at home working, or still at home, so they don't have any money to spend. They're not out there buying goods. There's nothing to buy, so I just don't see volumes picking up anytime soon. I think we'll be down for a while. But I've just gotten word that Ryan Schrieber is back online, hopefully without any static this time.
How you doing, Ryan? Talk to me.
I mean, apparently not so good. I'm having lots of technical difficulties today.
Well, you sound much better.
That's par for the course for you.
Good.
Right?
Yeah. yes.
But we can hear you loud and clear now.
Technology's really, really hard.
It is. It really is. So where were we? What were you talking about just as we cut you off?
No worries. So we were talking a little bit about like non-competes versus non-solicits and how common they are. Non-competes from what I've seen is still the more common vehicle for a business to try and protect itself. And the range of sort of outcomes in terms of how stringently written they are seem to be how sophisticated the business is. If they just want an off-the-shelf non-compete, it's going to just restrict people from doing everything, no matter what their place was in the organization. But a more sophisticated business usually has more dialed-in non-competes.
So because basically, I think I just did non-solicit. Maybe I did non-compete. I don't know. It's been a few years ago since I was as a freight broker. So, and I know that I couldn't go out and contact my customers, but I could work within the industry. How, from your point of view, how heavily enforced are non-competes and non-solicits in the industry?
Well, in terms of how legally enforceable they are, that's not something I can necessarily really speak to.
Yeah, not how legally enforceable, but how, what kind of resources do companies put behind to actually go after and try to enforce them at least?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it's very common for companies to send a cease and desist letter if they figure out where you're going and what you're going to be doing. Hey, just a reminder, future organization, this employee can't do these things, and we intend to litigate. If they do, it's expensive to go after somebody for a non-compete. So it's not particularly common in my experience to see companies actually try and take that to court. That being said, one of my favorite phrases in business is just because they won't win doesn't mean they won't litigate to cause a problem, which is why this conversation around where non-competes and non-solicits actually fit is a really, really important one to have.
It is. It is. And as a business owner, if you own a logistics company, whether it's a carrier or a freight broker, you do have to protect your business, right? Because all you have is your list of customers. But how do you go about that and also encourage a really great corporate culture?
Yeah, that's such an important line to walk, right? Like there's legal implications and there's practical implications to everything that you do. From a legal perspective, from a business owner's perspective, you train people, you invest in them, you invest in technology, you invest in these customer relationships. That is valuable and should be protected. At the same time, you want to create an environment where if somebody's not happy, they can leave easily. And so the reason that non-competes become really kind of overbearing is they trap you. And that can really negatively impact your corporate culture. So to answer your question, Kevin, which is how do you walk that line? Look to non-solicit to solve that problem and not.
So you're of the opinion it's better to have non-solicits in place rather than a blanket non-compete where you can't work in that industry again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a non-solicit protects their customer relationships. It can protect your carrier relationships. It can protect your employees or ex-employees from soliciting your current employees. And that is really what you, at the end of the day, want to protect. As a transportation provider, you are a sales organization with an execution arm. I've said that on this podcast before. So what you really need to protect, to your point, Kevin, is the revenue part of your business. That's drivers, that's customers, that's other employees, and that's third-party carriers if you're an intermediary.
That's a really good point. It is a good point. And basically, I feel like oftentimes a non-compete with someone who's 24, 25, not really, probably an average freight broker, right? It probably keeps them in their role long past their productivity.
I mean, how good they are is not even really the important consideration. It's whether or not that's an appropriate vehicle to do what you want to do across your business. The reason I'm not an attorney anymore is because attorneys are really bad at understanding what you actually want to accomplish with your business. So a non-compete certainly can protect you, or as a good vehicle for trying to protect your customer list, et cetera. There are other implications across your business that your attorney is the wrong person to help you figure out. And that's the culture piece, or that's the sales strategy piece.
Hey, Ryan, you said you prefer and you would advise your people, if we were giving legal advice here, you would advise them to do a non-solicit rather than a non-compete. But once that non-compete is signed, let's say that I get a job as a broker somewhere and I signed a non-compete, is there any legal way that down the road that company can say, you know what, I would rather have you in a non-solicit? Is there any way to change that? Or once that contract, that non-compete is signed, is it kind of locked until it's broken?
Every contract can be renegotiated. I mean, it's just both parties have to agree to it. Before a contract is signed, one party can unilaterally change the terms that they're willing to agree to. But like you see this in sports sometimes, right? Like, hey, I'm willing to pay you $20 million a year for 5 years. You don't sign, and then, oh, well, I signed this other guy, so now I can only give you $15 million. After it's signed, both parties have to agree to an adjustment to the underlying contract.
So if we were to put aside non-competes and non-solicitations and just talk about corporate culture, because, as you said a minute ago, freight brokerages, especially logistics company, it's basically a sales and marketing company, right? You're non-asset based. What you have is your client list. And you've been around sales and marketing companies. I have too. They can turn into pretty toxic environments pretty quickly, right? So what are some of your guiding principles of keeping a great corporate culture on a sales floor?
It is all about openness. I think transparency is an overused term, but openness is really the thing that you want to create. I talked about this recently on Carrier Direct Office Hours, which is our podcast, where I laid out for everyone that listened. You should, in sales, think about how in recruiting, you should think about what the last day an individual's employment looks like. And what does success look like on that day? And be open about the fact that this is probably not your last job, and work backwards to their first day to figure out how to maximize for that. And being open about the fact that this is probably not your last job frees everyone up to have conversations that are maybe more difficult if there's fear around losing the job. So when there's pain in that role, the first thing a person does, if there's not openness, is look outside your organization to solve that problem for them. Hey, I need another job because if I bring this up, I don't know if they're going to think I'm looking for another job. If you have an open where somebody can raise their hand and say, hey, I have a problem here and this is bothering me and I want to work through this without that fear of repercussion, their first place they're going to look is inside your organization. That's the number one thing.
I think a lot of it stems from, and I think we were on LinkedIn last night talking about this, is Jameen had a question that we both answered, or someone had a post. Maybe it was your post, actually, that we were answering. But it's really differentiation, right? It's hard to differentiate yourself, and I feel like it's hard to reach that openness about expectations and the role if you're not, as a company, trying to differentiate yourself in this space. Does that make sense?
I disagree.
Yeah.
Yes, it makes sense to me, Kevin, but I'm going to disagree with you here. Mm-hmm. I actually think that creating the openness is a differentiator. Very many companies do not do that. That is a foundational piece to differentiation.
No, I can agree with that. Yeah, basically it's not a chicken and egg argument, but it could be. But I agree with you on that. I think the openness can be a differentiator because they're hard to come by.
It's not that hard either. It's a change of mentality, certainly, but it's not.
That sounds hard.
You're actually giving up nothing to do it.
True, but it seems like it's a very hard thing for a lot of business owners to do, and managers as well, is change that mental state to more openness.
Yeah, it definitely comes down to what I would describe as professional empathy. But if you excel at sales, you have to have empathy for your customer's journey. Mm-hmm. And it's just a slight change of the dials, if you will, to understand that same professional empathy applies to your employees.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. But it's something that a lot of companies haven't mastered whatsoever.
Certainly. Yeah, they struggle with it.
Yeah.
And it's in part because I think they're not aware. And I would say the other input to that is they're not sure how to the extent that they even are aware. Like, how do I start having those conversations? How do I start sharing with my employees it's a traditionally been a fear-based management style.
It has, and it goes back to especially freight brokerages or trucking company, mostly freight brokerages, because that's my reference point. Is freight brokerages that are trying to scale, but they're trying to scale with that fear. They're trying to scale with unscalable type of processes that are, I wouldn't really say fear-based, but they're not that openness space. It's basically an entrepreneur who is a really good salesperson who knows how to do it, has made these sales, but then you have to teach a whole crew of people how to do what you do, which is very difficult if you're a natural born, sales and marketer.
That's the best point, which is that like the biggest thing that's difficult for anyone to understand is that the things that are easy for that person are not easy and obvious for everyone. So if you've been a great salesperson historically, and you built this business off of your back, it's hard to understand why when you hire most people, it's a disaster. Because you're hiring the wrong people, you're training people the wrong way, or not at all, most likely. And you say, man, this is so easy for me. I can't understand why you're not getting it. And I mean, listen, I'll raise my hand and say I used to be one of those people. So like this is coming from a place of honest and open like reflection on myself. But that's the hard part. This is easy for me. Why don't you get it?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why some of the great athletes are horrible coaches, right? Because they have just such natural ability that it's just easy for them, and they can't understand why it's not easy for others. And some of the great, mostly all the great coaches have been marginal people or have never even made it to that level because they had to learn everything about the game to make up for their lack of natural ability.
A huge miss we see all the time is promoting your highest performers solely because they're high performers into management roles. Mm-hmm. Those are two different skill sets.
Very different.
Being great at doing a thing and being great at developing other people to do that thing are incredibly different.
They are incredibly different, and you see that tension on every sales floor you go into just about.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially in brokerage.
And that's part of what breeds a poor culture, right?
Yeah, I was just about to ask you if you thought you built a better culture by promoting your point guards rather than promoting your shooting guards.
Oh, like undeniably. It's a fine line to walk on both sides, certainly, because you want to reward your high performers. But it's also about defining what are the different characteristics of high performance. Sales is one of those things, but so are softer skills and the ability to develop other people. There's a range of things that make you a high performer in any given role. And whether those translate to the next role is important. You don't want to just promote the worst performers because they're the best culture or best locker room guys, if you will. But you certainly like the middle of the pack performers who excel at those softer skills and that can really develop other people. Those are the ones that you really want to promote, and find other ways to reward your revenue high performers.
And that's a very difficult task.
That's probably another portion of being transparent, right? Is having those open conversations, which is not an easy conversation to have, especially if it's coming from the management position rather than the earner of the revenue. To have that conversation, to ask them what would be a better way to motivate them rather than a promotion.
All of this goes back to being intentional about the actions that you do. Like, and to your point about openness, Andrew, having the conversation with individuals about what motivates them. I was talking with Peter earlier today, our CEO, about how, historically, when you talk about incentive, it has been synonymous with compensation. But incentivization should not be synonymous with compensation. There are other things besides money that incentivize people to do the things that you want them to do. you need to be insightful about all of the things that you are doing to incentivize or de-incentivize people. So it all comes back to all of these things that we've talked about today come back to being intentional about the actions you're taking in your business. Whether you use a non-compete or a non-solicit, it's about being intentional about the problems you want to solve, how you reward and promote, how you compensate. All of those things are looking inside your business and being intentional about them.
So Ryan, you advise a lot of transportation companies. Carrier Direct advises a lot of or a lot of transportation companies on these questions here. So you've seen a lot. So basically, have you ever heard of incentivizing A and getting B? Kind of, you're incentivizing people to do one thing, and the results are producing something else. That are usually
you're incentivizing them to do one thing, but then you get whatever else. Yes,
yeah, exactly right, and it's probably not a productive thing usually. Where do you see that most often? Is it in compensation? Is it in promotion? Is it through those soft skills, hard skills?
That's a great question. It's actually across all your entire operating model. So there's process inputs to that. There's job profile inputs to that. There's operating models inputs to that. And then there's certainly compensation. So one big miss we see that people just kind of don't identify on their own is how your roles are organized and whether or not it actually reinforces the behavior you want. I'll use a brokerage example, Kevin, because you've been continuing to talk about brokerage. So many brokers have account managers that are both farmers who have to like aggressively go out and get transactional business, and what I would call gatherers who just like take in order tenders and build loads, et cetera. And that's one role, and it's comped the same way in most businesses. But those are very different roles, right?
Oh, very different.
So you'll look at a gatherer account manager and say they're doing a bad job. And you'll look at a farmer and you'll say that, oh, this is a high performer. Both of them may be high performers. Your roles are incorrect to get what you want out of them, right? So that's one of the biggest inputs.
That is. So that's one of the really big things, because I see that all the time myself, is there's good farmers and there's good hunters. And those are completely different roles, but you can be very good at one or the other. You can be very good at both, but usually one or the other people are really good at.
Sure. And that's why like brokerages moved to buy, sell, back in the backhaulers days in the first place. Yep. Selling to a truck is different than selling to a customer. There are similarities, and you have to have the similar information. But they're different sales processes.
Yes. They're much different.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Ryan, I just wanted to thank you for your time, man. Tell you how absolutely fantastic that beard is looking. I hope you keep that thing going.
Yeah, my wife has been trying to trim it herself, and I'm like, absolutely not.
Yeah,
so,
you got to sleep lightly these days.
And you know what?
We're going to see. Yeah.
I really like that hoodie. That is a great hoodie.
Yeah.
You can send a couple of them to Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Yeah, I think Kevin and I would rock those.
Okay. All right. I'll talk to Peter about that one.
Okay. Definitely.
All righty, Ryan. You have a good one, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, y'all.
No problem.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, so we didn't quite finish our discussion on the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index. We basically just had mentioned that it's fallen 15%, or fallen 15 points rather. Volumes are falling through the roof. There's no real floor in sight, even though we kind of maybe are seeing a little bit of a deceleration into the trough this week. But again, most of the businesses are still closed. Freight's just not moving right now.
Basically all retail, all non-essential businesses are closed down. So you got to think that it's going to take a hit in the freight markets, and that's what it's doing right now. So for the next few weeks, it's going to be a very tough environment.
Yep, I'm glad you mentioned retail. That kind of leads us into our first long short. I have been long awaiting this data set. I've kind of had it bookmarked on my calendar for the last couple of weeks now. We have retail sales data that will come out, I think, 8:30 tomorrow morning. I have a feeling this is going to be just a dreadful number. I'm expecting double digits downwards. The consensus is about 7% year over year down. Kevin, I'm asking you, are you long or are you short double digit downside to retail spending when it comes out tomorrow?
I am long double digit. I think it'll be 10% or more.
Right. I'm glad you said that because I have a little data here. I'll throw it in the article or in something that
I've seen
we
that
put this
article.
out.
That's one of the reasons why I'm going long that.
Yes,
actually.
this is some scary data from J.P. Morgan. So this is on their debit and credit card sales volume. So they break it down into 4 categories. One being supermarkets, wholesale clubs, and discount stores. Then retail, restaurants, and travel and leisure. So travel and leisure down 100%. It's dragging along the x-axis.
Down 100%. And that correlates to the TSA data that we talked about this morning on the coronavirus freight market update, is that there's about 4% at the height, 4% of passenger travel on planes compared to this day last year. And that's been very consistent over the last month. I mean, 4%.
Yeah, and just think about that.
Normally 2.5 million people are checked in through TSA per day in the United States.
Right.
100,000 yesterday.
And you have to think about how that drips into hotel expenditures, how that drips into even restaurants. I mean, there's so many things that the people that would be traveling would be spending money on that they're not spending that would be considered consumer spending.
And I trust real-time consumer, debit and credit card payments much more than economic data that's released.
Agreed.
Anthony Smith might not agree with me over
survey-based
here, but I
agree. I mean, I think the data coming from the payment processors is much closer. I mean, it's just like comparing the weekly jobless claims to the unemployment rate, whereas the weekly jobless claims is a much it's a data that's collected from people actually applying rather than a household survey. Like that one is. So yeah, I agree with you. I do think spending is going to be down double digits. I think it may be down considerably, something like 15 or 20.
What's our next long short?
So we got one more long short. We're talking about the S&P 500. So all-time highs, we were at February 13th. We were at $340 on the SPY, the Spider Index. We are currently at 282. So that is, we are 23% up off the lows that we experienced just 3 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And that low was 218. So that was down 34% in total. My question to you, Kevin, do you think that we can hit all-time highs in the S&P 500 by the end of the year? That would be a run of another roughly 20% from where we're at today.
Can we hit it sometime during
2020?
I'm going to go long. Will we end up there? Probably not. But I think we might be able to run up 20% at some point over the next 8 months.
I've seen these markets are just bonkers. I mean, we're up 25% off the lows a couple weeks ago, or the lows were down 35%. I mean, they're just very volatile, wild swings. I don't think we're done retesting the lows, but who knows? We might be. I mean, all the investment banks are seemingly now pushing forward that the bear market is over. This is the new bull market, and it's here to stay. I've seen that from pretty much everybody. Even though we know GDP number is going to be terrible, we know that the Fed has pumped a lot of money in. We know all of these things, that unemployment is going to be 20% or so. We know all these things are coming. But the markets seemingly are shaking it off.
They're shaking it off, and basically on this criteria, which I don't think is a really good thesis, or this thesis. I don't know if this thesis that everyone's going to return back to work and everything's going to be smooth again. Yeah. This is not going to be a smooth transition. There's going to be a lot of rocky patches, ups and downs. It's not going to be smooth. And I think with the thesis that, everything is just going to be linear.
Then you may see all-time highs. That's your point?
That's my point. And that's the thesis that probably the market is going off of, which is not a very good thesis whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if we hit all-time highs, but I see a big run in the SPY. We can give a couple plugs. So we've got a new paper coming out this Friday, the Freight Intel. We're doing a credit analysis paper. This is kind of a continuation of our Great Quarter Guys. Last week, we talked about credit analysis and
customer credit risk,
accounts receivable risk that people will be going through. You guys are back with Put That Coffee Down tomorrow. What's on the docket?
Tomorrow, and we're going to talk about using video to make sales in the demo process. We did video last week to prospect, kind of, or individual video, and we're going to take that one step further this week.
Alrighty, so that is at 12 o'clock tomorrow. On Thursday, we've got another coronavirus market update, and then Friday, we're back to close the week out, 12 noon with What the Truck, Dooner and the Dude.
Yep. And Wednesdays, we have Freightonomics and with Sonar as well.
That's right. We got lots of great media coming for you in the next few days. Stay tuned. Here's episode 25 in the books. Thanks, guys.